Welcome to Dangerous Policy. I'm Charlene.
I'm Crispin.
And this is our week in review where we look at last week's, the week that we finished, the topics that we covered. We covered a lot of topics.
Yeah.
Pretty heavy.
It was a big week.
Yeah.
A lot of big weeks in the world, yeah.
How was your week in general?
Well, look, it's been great. I think we had some good topics. I thought, just getting a sense of engagement with, like the Lithuania demographics video was really prompted by conversations we had with you guys. So, thanks for feedback on what had been happening in recent years. I wasn't aware of it, so I had to do some digging and investigation. So there is an opportunity to turn that around.
Yeah.
North Korea has obviously been a part of my life for a long time. We might even have some good guests come on at some point that know a lot about North Korea. We'll keep you informed about that. Yeah. We also have our submission to the Australian Foreign Relations Bill inquiry. Now, it would probably be bad form for us to kind of read through it before the committee itself has an opportunity to look at it. But that will be with the committee this week. And then when they've published it on their website as a written submission, we'll bring it back to you and talk about it. And if we do get asked to testify, we'll certainly cover that.
Testify. But I know you've covered it. There's a song that just keeps saying testify, so like testify. But you have covered it in previous videos, like the arguments that we put forward in the submission.
Yes. I mean, I think we provide more of a way forward in this. Like in the previous kind of videos, I've talked about the contested space, the different interest groups, the fact that, on the one hand, you've got our security agencies that are very anti-China. So for those that obviously don't know, there is a strong contested space at the moment between the United States and China and where Australia sits. We have a long-standing strategic partnership with the United States, a formal alliance, and a huge economic trade relationship with China, our biggest trading partner, and a tremendous tension between that as the new Cold War in Asia heats up.
Yeah.
And so where does Australia sit? How do we navigate that? Well, there's an inquiry into a particular bit of legislation to try and address some of those questions. And
because each state basically operated their relationship with China, right? And when there was a federal level, federal policy, but...
Yeah, so under the Australian Constitution, the external affairs powers, so foreign relations, sits with the national government, as you'd expect. But the realities of like people to people, business, all of that sort of stuff, well, the states all have a strong interest in that. So, our submission not only kind of points out the changes in Australian foreign policy that have led to the existing challenges we now have, but also talks about the democratization of foreign policy. Like previously, you have to be very much a policy wonk or a think tank person or something of that ilk to really have an interest. Now, people across the board, general members of the public, like to talk about global issues. They watch podcasts like this one, and they have a very sophisticated opinion of world affairs and realize how events around the world impact their own life. So, definitely something that's quite clear in the pandemic era, right? So, so that's a big change. And then we have our recommendations for the way forward. Like, okay, how does Australia come together as Australians to navigate these really complicated challenges when you've got such disparate interests within the country? So you've got the business community, you've got our security agencies, you've got various, foreign lobby groups. These are very much a contested space for us. So how do we do something in a cohesive and long-term and sustained fashion? So that's what our submission is about. And then the detail of that we'll discuss, at a future time. But we're very excited about it. It's the first, government submission we've written as dangerous policy. So, a significant milestone for the podcast.
Yeah.
And hopefully, hopefully we'll be able to have a positive impact. And I'm sure the members of the committee will consider the issues, in their fullest.
Yeah. So the biggest news of the week was obviously Ruth Bader Ginsburg passing away.
Yeah.
And okay, when I first read it, I was like, this is trending on Twitter. I think this is important, Crispin. And you were like, what? He literally jumped out of his chair.
It was pretty much exactly like that. Yeah. So, I mean, as I think most of us did, who follow this. I mean,
she was 80.
87.
87. Yeah. And I mean, she was holding out for a long time, right? Just because she knew the implication it would have with the Democrats and the Republicans.
Yes.
And the election.
Yes. Well, so every member of the Supreme Court obviously thinks about their legacy and the makeup of the Supreme Court. I think she was dumbfounded that Donald Trump was elected president of the United States. I think she was ready to retire with a Hillary Clinton presidency and being able to be involved in, nominating a successor and making sure that her preferred, people in her path were perhaps people that she'd personally mentored or interned with her in the future. So that was her kind of, no doubt, her thought, because that would be the approach of every Supreme Court justice. But it wasn't to be. Donald Trump was elected. And so Ruth Bader Ginsburg did her utmost to try and wait out the Trump presidency. I remember when a couple of years ago, someone asked her, how long do you think you've got left? And she's like, I think I have maybe 5 years. So she really tried to wait out the Republican presidency, and it wasn't up to her; it was up to the illnesses that overtook her. But yeah, I mean that's a legacy that that will stand the test of time, even though her successor will definitely be a very different kind of judicial thinker.
Is it possible though, because the election's coming up so soon? I think it's like less than 40 days, like 40-ish days.
Yep.
For them to actually nominate somebody into the Supreme Court, because I think I read an article saying that the minimum amount of days I've seen happen is like 50 days, and this is like 40. I don't know though.
It will be a red hot go. Like So the Republicans will do this for a couple of reasons. Number one, they will know that the Supreme Court nominations are so important to the Republican base because they care about abortion, they care about social issues, they care all these things determined on the Supreme Court, taxes, constitution, all of this stuff. That if the Republicans, having been given the opportunity to flip the Supreme Court in such a decisive way, to get someone who is a staunch progressive and have a absolute originalist appointed, if they missed that opportunity and election came around, Republican voters would not forgive that. They would just stay at home. They would be so disillusioned by the failure of their Senate colleagues in particular, that they probably lose the election. So there'd be a fire lit under the Republican lawmakers to get this done. And the other reason, of course, is that just in case they lose, right? So it's if they lose, then it's likely that the Senate will no longer have a majority of Republicans. Certainly the president will be a Democrat and therefore nominating a progressive. So for those reasons, the Republicans will do whatever it takes to get someone nominated and confirmed. But it's gonna be a bloody fight because
what's the general criteria for because the president nominates them into the Supreme Court. What does the president consider? Obviously their political stance, their ideologies, competency, I'd expect.
Yeah, so many factors. So first of all, youth, because it's a lifetime appointment. So they want someone who is old enough to be able to do the job, i.e. they've got enough judicial experience and knowledge of precedents and things like that they can demonstrate competency. Also, you need a certain amount of history behind you so that they can look at your track record and kind of guess what your decisions are likely to look like going forward. So that's an important thing. Obviously, qualifications and standards, because it is a high echelon office. We studied for many generations your decisions, but certainly partisanship is now the primary thing. Like it's whether or not they're from your side of politics, because it is a lifetime appointment, and it is the strongest tool that Trump has been able to use on the traditional Republican establishment. So Trump has brought in a whole new wing into the party of former blue-collar type, salt-of-the-earth Democrat workers, right? They're now Republicans and they're rusted on Trump supporters. the cudgel that Trump has had to beat the Republican elite who dislike Trump has been the opportunity to nominate originalists to the Supreme Court. So Trump has been very forthcoming in putting out lists of justices that he would appoint to the Supreme Court. He has held firm on choosing from those lists. So the conservatives in America have been absolutely dancing on the moon with Trump's authenticity in delivering justices that they like, justices that they would support. And so,
as a leader should do.
Well, yeah, but it's I mean, it's like in the ideal kind of romance of the founding fathers, you would choose whoever is the best judicial thinker of the day, whoever that happened to be, would be who was nominated and confirmed. Now, that just doesn't reflect realities of power and politics, right?
Yeah.
So, it is the main issue. And if the Democrat was elected, it would be the same concern. They would choose a staunch progressive that they thought they could depend on for decades to come. But as I said, this is such a fiery moment in American history where many Americans, for silly reasons, but nonetheless genuinely believe that Trump is not a legitimate president, that his decisions are not legitimate, that they shouldn't recognize laws that he proposes and things that the Republican Congress passes. And certainly if it is a tight election, which it absolutely could be, and if there is a legal appeal to the Supreme Court in which Trump has 3 of the Supreme Court nominees himself, which is an astonishing number of appointees in one term, and it returns him to office, as you would expect such a Supreme Court to do. I mean, who knows what happens after that? We have potentially civil war. And so we're talking about, like, I think it's dawned on people just how dangerous this is.
So is it just really important for Americans to go out and vote?
Yes, I think a high turnout and a decisive result is what's needed here. If Trump was re-elected in a landslide, which he may well be, then certainly if Biden wins in a landslide, so be it. But if it's close, like let's say one wins the popular vote, so Biden wins the popular vote and Trump wins the electoral college. Yeah. Well, the Constitution says electoral college, full stop, which I think is the right approach. But many Democrats would say, Garland, who was nominated by Obama, was not allowed to be confirmed because the Republican Senate prevented that from happening for basically a full year. Why should they acknowledge the legitimacy of someone that was pushed through in a few days? And then certainly a decision that was handed down by said justice that reconfirmed President Trump as the president of the United States. The way the media would spin that would be as a coup, right? So this is just, I'm not, like, go back a couple of years, you would have thought that such commentary about civil war and things like that is overblown. But I'm genuinely nervous about.
There'd just be so many things that happen in 2020. I'm just kind of like, when does it stop?
They'll stop December 31st, but then there'll be the things that happen in 2021.
Oh my gosh, yes. It obviously, definitely the Republicans are going to work fast, and we just have to watch and see what happens, right?
I mean, I would expect that they'll, you have the funeral, and then basically the next day we've got the fight. Yeah. Now, I'm sure that they will have already shortlisted from because Trump's list is, I think, 20-something people. They will have shortlisted a couple of names. I mean, there was Senator Tom Cotton and Ted Cruz were on that list as well. Now, both of them had previously said, we're very honored to be on that list, but, we like politics and so on. As you'd expect an elected person to say, I'm here to represent the people. If they were actually nominated, it'd be interesting to see what they say. Also, be interesting what it does for the numbers in the Senate, because here's where it gets a nightmare scenario, right? The president nominates, let's say, Ted Cruz.
Okay.
Ted Cruz is being in the Senate, and becomes the deciding vote himself as to whether he's going to be confirmed as a Supreme Court justice. Just this could happen, right? So he votes for himself.
As you would.
He gets appointed, lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court. Yeah. There's a contested election.
Yeah.
Ted Cruz hands down a decision. Trump, well done, welcome back to office, right? I mean, this would just be the optics of this and the way it would be portrayed in the media and how it would be received among sort of Democrats. Whoosh. I mean,
I thought democracy is meant to work.
Democracy does work. I mean, this is the thing. As Winston Churchill once said, democracy is absolutely the worst form of government, except for all the others that have ever been tried, right? And yes, it's a messy, difficult fight, but it's not the system that's broken, although the system is broken. It's the fact that the divisions that are in America at the moment, the hyper-partisan divisions on both sides, are so deep, so filled with hatred, so filled with fear and contempt, that the bonds of kinship that makes an American an American is itself contested, and therefore we could see violence on an unprecedented scale. Now, democracy is really good for peaceful transitions of power when democracy is working well, because that's what democracy does. Democracy allocates power based upon an agreed form of legitimacy. And that form of legitimacy is the enfranchisement participation of people who cast a vote, right?
Yeah.
Other forms of government have other forms of determining legitimacy, right? In China, it's not, people's enfranchisement and competitive, like multi-pluralistic parties. What confirms legitimacy is the what's the word? The thing of heaven, the favor of heaven, basically. Like, i.e., if the country is doing well, then whoever's in power has legitimacy by virtue of the fact that the country is doing well.
And in North Korea, it's brainwashing.
Yes, and
family ties.
And it's, in China, it's a hypocrisy as well, because of course, if the country isn't doing well, you won't see the Communist Party leadership being like, oh well, yes, the country's doing badly, therefore we're just going to give up power. It'll be we're going to find another excuse. So much better that you have a messy democracy than a seemingly clean dictatorship. And when you talk to North Korea, it's at another level, because at least in China, you're talking about an ideal that's separate to, like, the Communist Party will say that only they can be the custodians of the Chinese tradition and protect China and make China strong. And sure, they flog a lot of idealistic nonsense, but the cult of personality around President Xi isn't yet at a neo-religious fervor, right?
And they are progressing. It's not like the nation's starving. Like it's
wealthy,
they're thriving.
A little too well. Whereas the North Koreans, it's hero worship. It's an indoctrination from birth. And that, you don't have access to any information that the government doesn't want you to have. And it's a cult of personality. If you know anyone who is part of a cult, and I would controversially call intersectionality a cult, but let's say a real cult, right? Then you'll know what North Korea is like on a nationwide scale, because that's what it is. It's just absolute veneration and subservience to a charismatic leader, no matter what the atrocities, no matter how evil, no matter what the suffering, and with a view to separate them from anyone that has differing views, that encourages them to inform on their neighbors, in order to preserve and uphold absolute subservience to central authority. Now, the Chinese do not have that same degree of self-obsession with the leadership. Like you could criticize President Xi outside of China with Chinese people, and they will have a view. They might disagree with you or agree with you, but that they will have a sophisticated opinion, and it won't be about how President Xi is, like an ultimate god capable of all things. It will be, he's doing good things for the country. He's standing up to outside powers. It'll be like policy stuff that they talk about. They won't talk about himself as some kind of superior form of creature.
Yeah. That video when you talked to experience in North Korea, that was just a very interesting video. I just felt, when you shared your experience, felt just the penny just dropped. Yes, this is a different form of crazy that actually exists. And it's incredible that we saw it coming and we just don't do anything about it. But can we? I don't know.
I think that the door on that is nearly closed. I mean, what it would take is an actual military attack on a nuclear armed state in order to disarm them of their nuclear weapons.
At what consequence? Because people.
Enormous. Well, the people themselves, the North Korean people, the retaliation against South Korea and Japan, the threat of nuclear attack from somewhere. There's all this talk about non-proliferation and that nuclear weapons won't save you from whatever. Well, in practice, it does. If you have nuclear weapons, then you do deter others from invading you. And after Libya, where Muammar Gaddafi had given up his WMD program in 2003, he subsequently invaded. So Ukraine, you've got, they had all those nuclear weapons left over from the Cold War. They gave them up for guarantees to their territorial integrity. That Ukraine lost half of its nation. And the North Koreans look at that and go, well, we're not going to let that happen to us. We're going to cling to our nuclear weapons if we starve. And we're going to make sure that we're going to be able to create a high price for the United States, an unacceptably high price for the United States to prevent any kind of intervention. And I think they're at that point now so it's just cowardice. I remember all these reports, and it reflects my understanding as well of what happened, that during the Fire and Fury period, Trump's senior officials, including the Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, were very reluctant to provide any military options to the president for fear that he would start a war. Now, first of all, that's not their job. Their job is to provide those options to the duly elected head of state and commander-in-chief. So that's just an outrage right off the bat. But secondly, and I've been in public debates about this with very smart people, and people think that I'm some crazy interventionist hawk, even though I marched against the Iraq War. I was implacably against the Liberian intervention at a time when it was not conducive to my career to be so. And yet, I'm very hawkish on North Korea. And the reason for that is people don't look at the other side of the ledger, right? So if I say we need to have a conflict with North Korea because we cannot live with a North Korea that's capable of reaching the United States with a nuclear weapon, and that should be totally against American policy, and it is worth going to a war to prevent that from happening, people rightly point to the costs and the risks. They say that tens of thousands of American lives, untold destruction in South Korea, untold destruction in Japan, huge risks if you don't get all the nuclear weapons. What happens then? Absolutely fair points, right? Totally get it, right? It's not, it's an outrage that we ever got to this point, okay? It should have been dealt with decades ago. But you have to weigh this against the alternative, right? There is an end point for this. It's not North Korea peaceably evolving into an international global happy citizen. It's a cult movement collapsing in fiery destruction. And do you want that to happen now, or do you want that to happen 10, 15 years' time when North Korea has 200, 500 ICBMs capable of annihilating the United States? Right? There is not... People who say, Crispin, you're crazy for advocating conflict, and it is
how else would it be resolved?
Yes, it's incumbent upon them who talk about the costs of conflict, talk about the costs of ignorance and doing nothing. And they don't do that. They just talk about the cost of action. And I find that a moral as well as intellectual failing. And so there are people that I deeply respect, like Dr. David Santoro, who's willing to engage with me publicly on these issues, and we have a significant debate. So he's a friend who's the director, I think deputy president of the Pacific Forum in Hawaii, deals with a lot of these nuclear issues. And so we have these debates, but there are other people that are just dismissive. They just think that you're crazy. I'm like, well, okay, let's engage with the actual arguments. If I'm crazy, what's your solution? And if they don't have a solution, and I hear crickets, right? Mm-hmm. Then what it is cowardice. It's not actual. Like it's a moral acerbiqueness masquerading as to cover for fear. And not willing to deal with it's not an adult approach to genuine global security threats.
It is definitely a wicked problem, just because they are so shut off from the world. And you're right, if we don't do anything, they're just going to become more and more of a threat, to the point that we won't even have a big enough response. Because like other countries, like we can see other countries, have our own spies and whatnot. So we can keep other countries accountable for any sort of threats. But with North Korea, if we don't know anything, how the hell are we meant to prepare?
It was a total embarrassment when Trump was going through the war talk with North Korea. Uh-huh. The CIA on Twitter is like, oh, does anyone speak Korean? We really need some recruits. I'm like, what? Like, how could you drop the ball so badly that you need to publish on Twitter for recruits when you're in the middle of a crisis, right? Oh my God. So it's good, and it's because the Americans have been obsessed with the Middle East, have been obsessed with Iran and
very true.
Afghanistan. So they teach everyone Pashtun or whatever. They don't teach anyone Korean. So just a bit of a joke. And South Korea has a very different policy towards North Korea than America should. Policy? Well, obviously it depends on the government of the day, but this government is very pro-engagement, very, plays down any kind of threat from North Korea, really wants to, it's kind of pursuing the sort of sunshine policy of trade and openness and positivity, irrespective of how they might be treated themselves. But South Korea has gone through a bit of a transformation in the last 20 years. So up until, let's say, the late 90s, the vast majority of Koreans wanted to reunify, right, in South Korea. They're like, okay, well, we are a peninsula, and, I have a deep love of Korean history, right? I'm obsessed with the Imjin Wars and stuff at the moment. So the peninsula is quite a significant, thing, but whether it's Koryo and the Silla, right through the Chosun and through the present day, it is a whole of peninsula culture and language, and it is one ethnic people. So it is artificially divided, and that's true. And for people up until the 90s, they typically kind of remembered the Korean War, so they might have family on the other side, and so there was a lived experience of people remembering a time when there were one people. But now the younger generations of South Koreans do not want to reunify at all, because A, they see themselves as South Korean, not Korean in the way that the North Koreans do. They have all their great brands, Hyundai, they got the K-pop, they got like their cultural things happen. And then the economic,
evolved, definitely,
they've changed, and the economic disparities. Like they looked at, like when Germany reunified, the disparity was a tiny fraction of what the disparity is between North and South Korea. And yet the legacy of reunifying East and West Germany is still being played out today. It's still having an impact. Whereas trying to reabsorb North Korea into South Korea would just be an abject nightmare, because it would be, not only does what you learn in North Korea not going to help you at all in South Korea in any way, the differences in worldview are now such that there would be very different people. but again, this would have to happen at some point, surely. I mean, this whole thing is going to blow up, right? Like it's going to, and at the moment, there is like patronage from China towards North Korea, but that's all just temporary. There's not. Yeah, it's not clear where it all goes. The South Koreans definitely don't want the cost and pain of reunifying with the North. There's no appetite for that. So young people in South Korea today won't pursue that kind of reunification agenda at all. But they won't necessarily want to have conflict with North Korea either. The South Koreans don't really fear the North Koreans in the way that perhaps they once did, or like up until the 1970s.
It's because they always get threats and there's nothing happens.
There's partly that, but also I think they feel they understand one aspect of North Koreans, because if you're in North Korea, the idea, and this is going to be so painful if they ever learn this, right? North Koreans do not believe that South Koreans would want anything other than to be unified under Kim Jong-un's benevolent rule, right? Like that's what they believe, is that the South Koreans are prevented from reunifying because of American military power, right? Now, they don't know that's not true, and they definitely don't know that South Koreans today don't want anything to do with them. So when they find that out, that's just going to be just so painful for them. They're not going to know how to process that. But yeah, so who knows? Who knows where this is all going to go? It's a fascinating experiment in the human condition, but enormous tragedy. And there's also a moral dimension to letting this go on.
So yes, you can let them, like you said, that they were actually happy living there. Quite normal, actually, but
the deprivation. And when I say they're quite happy if they're part of the society. Like if you're in a gulag or you're in a concentration camp, or your family's being purged. I mean,
but if they know that, if they feel like that's the normal, then it's not.
Yeah, they do.
They're conditioned to.
But our tolerance of it, like we know this is happening there, and we're not doing anything about it.
Yeah. Very true.
And yeah, so I'm an implacable hawk on North Korea, and I say this as someone who deeply cares about the people I met and dealt with in North Korea. Like they were smart, they were great people, but because they're in the elite, like any conflict with the North Koreans, they'd be in harm's way. If North Korean authorities ever found out that they were connected with me, then that could have severe repercussions for them, because here I am criticizing North Korea. That's not what's supposed to happen. I'm supposed to go there, have a great experience, come out and tell everyone
how great North Korea is.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a concern. But I really enjoyed my time there. Like I'm very grateful for the experience, because it's not something that it's not an experience that you can have any other way. And it did teach me about a lot of aspects of myself and how the human condition and how totalitarianism works. And it was an amazing time.
Yeah, it definitely conflicts with my brain. Like growing up in a democratic society and then being thrown into a different society, like as stark as North Korea. Okay, I'm gonna segue.
Yeah, please.
Is how do you keep your friends when you have opposing political views? Because I feel like I try to hold myself back when I talk anything about politics. It always ends up in a fight. And then I'm kind of like, oh, this is not worth it. Doesn't even matter. I'm not even in control of it anyway. So let's just stop talking. And that really shouldn't be the attitude, because that's how change happens, right? You're meant to engage in debate. But I don't know. I just feel like...
This is so vexing for today. It's such a painful question to hear, because it happens all the time, including my own life.
I don't want to be cancelled, Crispin.
No one should be. And okay, so there are different types of friends in this space. There are those people that feel really strongly about something but know they can't articulate it very well. So I'm thinking of one person in particular who I see as totally ideologically possessed, but I have to be circumspect about the fact that she doesn't, like, she has her views and she has them, and that's okay, and she's not going to change the views, and she's not really able to think through why she has those views or is emotionally capable to engage with someone who challenges those views, right?
Okay.
So in that space, I feel like I have the responsibility to, I might not be able to help myself poking fun time to time, but as a rule, focus on those elements of our friendship and partnership as people that are completely, what it's about is the human connection, right? And so I just try to avoid political discussions, as you say, with that person because they're not capable of engaging with them in an adult way.
So then, choose your battles. No.
Well, it's being mindful of the limitations of the people you engage with, and then there is, and I say this to someone who's very, like, this person is very smart and very capable in other areas, and they themselves would acknowledge they're not perfectly emotionally regulated when it comes to their political beliefs. But then there are people who,
are you talking about like extremists?
No. Okay. No, I'm talking about people that, see, extremists tend to have dogma embedded into them, right? So they'll at least, let's say if you're an extremist communist, they'll at least be able to sit there and cite Marx, right? They'll have been focused on it and they would have adopted a particular ideology. Whereas this is someone who's just accepted things that are told to them. Right? Then there are people that not only are ideologically possessed, but politically motivated and demonize you for a different point of view, right? So the fact that I have said, for example, that men don't menstruate right here on this program. Oh
my gosh, I can just feel the mobs in my head. The Twitter mobs are just like, you're just as bad as J.K. Rowling. Like that's what I'm just imagining in my head right now.
Yeah, so you got the anxiety of being cancelled, but people shouldn't be talking without fear like this, right?
Yeah,
like
it's strange, isn't it?
So here I am, and there are people who will think that I am the worst person in the world for saying that, right? Just the Twitter moms that you're talking about. So they are ideologically possessed but politically motivated, right? And they will absolutely seek to cancel you for saying this. Now, I've got friends on my Facebook page who will watch this, who share all of that stuff on Facebook, and it doesn't bother me at all, right? Like they want to promote, like gender dysphoria is a problem, and 50 genders or whatever. That's fine, and pronoun uses, all that stuff. That's fine. You're entirely entitled to do that, and I will not stop being friends with them for that. But they might stop being friends with me for saying this. They will see this as transphobic, whatever phobic. It's just sort of calling people a witch, basically, in the modern day. And I just think that's just really sad. So
sad, why?
Well, because the choice is so bad, right? When you say, how can you do this without losing friends? Well, you can either diminish yourself because you remain silent on things you know to be true, right? And things that you believe, or you preserve a partnership with someone. Now, I think that line gets drawn differently depending on the relationship. So if you're married to someone and you love them and you're committed and you've got a family and all that, well, there is always that distinction between being right and being in a happy partnership, right? And there are some things that you should both just give way on in order to make things work, right? That's fair enough because you're committed to one another.
Yeah.
But if your friendships are contingent on someone having a particular political point of view, then you yourself are quite diminished in the perspectives that you'll be exposed to and being able to, as I said in the first video we made, like good ideas don't exist because you suppress everybody else. Good ideas exist because they compete with bad ideas and win, right? So, and there are people, there's one person that is a staunch intersectional activist who I love. We're friends, been friends forever. But I see that she's becoming increasingly entrenched in her position, and I was still kind of on the fence when this was happening, but I've gone the other way. And she tried to convert me to her kind of cultish way of thinking. And I was, well, she sees the world as a endless kaleidoscope cascade of intersectional oppression, where you have a hierarchy of victimhood with, gender dysphoria, black, whatever at the top, and straight white male at the bottom. And the way in which I can demonstrate myself as being an ally is by consistently talking about my privilege. It's introduced. I'm not going to re-racialize our society. Right? I'm just not. I think that I'm fixated on what Sam Harris said, is treating skin color like hair color. I don't care what your skin color is. No one should care about my skin color. Let's focus on the real issues. Right? That's my view. Sorry if that offends people, but that's my view. So she tried to convert me to her way of thinking, which I think is entirely within her remit. And she's a very intelligent, very articulate person, a great ambassador for this ideology. And wanted me to join up with her because she saw me as, for whatever reason, somehow influential, and thought that I would be a good ally. And my rejection of that worldview will certainly has impacted our partnership. Now, but there is an underlying human thing there, which is like, look, these are not the core essence of why we're friends with one another in human life, why we have human connection. Like there are things we care about people, as individuals. And my resentment is to be then put into a group. Right, like I like to be treated like an individual, just like most people do. I don't want anyone to speak for me as a white male. Like I don't want anyone to get up and say on behalf of the white community, I'm blah 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 blah, just as people would say on behalf of the black community or the Hispanic community or whatever. Like these aren't useful divisions of society. So I reject that viewpoint. But being connected with a human being based on their human characteristics, the things that, the shared sufferings and experiences and affections and interests and all the stuff that the plethora that makes social animals, that's what you have to prioritize. The problem is that when you have a series of ideologies that connect virtue with opinion, right? So if you, for example, believe that sex is a thing, right? Like J.K. Rowling, then you're not just of a different opinion, or let's say you have the opposite side of that view and think that person is wrong. They're not just wrong, they're bad, they're defective, they're less human, right? They are fascists and Nazis, right? That's when friendship can't survive. And not even family can survive. Like one of the great tragedies of revolution, when you look at the British Revolution or the French Revolution, is just how many fathers and sons were at war with one another. Like it just the excesses of the terror knew no friendship boundaries, right? Like and so you've got to you've got to prioritize human value over viewpoints, and that's where I think the conservatives are doing so much better with people, because I think people instinctively understand this, and that conservatives in general are quite happy to be friends with people of a different viewpoint. And the surveys bear that out. Like you're much more likely to stop being friends with someone if you're a lefty and you find out your friend is a conservative than if you're a conservative and find out your friend is a lefty. there's just a greater acceptance on the conservative side of differing viewpoints. One, because there is a primacy given to rhetoric and argument to resolve discussion. So on the conservative side, because they believe in freedom of expression, they believe that all progress, such as is progress, should be explored through proper inquiry, right? They apply Enlightenment principles of intellectual interrogation of things to find out what the best ideas are. Whereas, unfortunately, and it didn't have to be this way, it hasn't always been this way, but on the left, it's imposed dogma. You believe this particular point of view and you accept it as fiat, or you are ostracized not only from that political viewpoint, but from the community as a whole as a defective heretic who needs to be burned at the stake.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I'm a self-proclaimed lefty.
Yeah.
To be honest. And I agree. There are some times where I have found myself, and maybe it is this podcast, not sure, that I've been more critical of the left in a way that more so just they're hypocritical on a lot of levels, that it just kind of frustrates me, and I get really confused. I know we did touch on this, like people on the left get confused where the hell they belong anymore nowadays.
A lot of political refugees on the left. Yeah.
Yeah, and it is really interesting. I don't know why, but in this conversation, I'm just like, whoa. And I think it takes a little more courage actually to, actually be able to listen to different viewpoints. And do you think it's because people think of like people on the left or the right? It's like the idea of dangerous ideas. And then that is why they get labelled as, you're a bad person, and they vilify them because of their quote unquote dangerous ideas and their intentions. I don't know.
I think, it's so bad. I mean, so you and I disagree on a lot, right? Like, you have views on vaping, and I'm kind of like, You have views on public broadcasting, and I'm like, right? There's all this stuff that you and I disagree on, but they're just differences of opinion. But the thing that I think we both have as a connection is the same desire for the general good, right?
Yes.
If you believe your interlocutor, the person you're discussing something with, has the best of intentions, they just want what's best for people, right? And they have a different view on how to achieve that equally good outcome, then politics almost becomes, a matter of scientific inquiry, right? Like you actually start having a discussion and you work out what's best and why, and the pros and cons and drawbacks, and you develop policy accordingly. Whereas when you start identifying a tribe, and when you start, when ideology becomes the measure of virtue, then people have fear because they must, kneel for the BLM or whatever it is, or their careers will be destroyed, their families will be shamed, they'll be cancelled on social media.
And the thing is, right, because there are some things on the left that I totally agree with, the whole vaping, and the idea of the government does have a role in our lives, and I don't really believe in the whole liberty and absolute liberty, like classical libertarians. But there are things that I disagree with, and I'm so scared to talk out about it because of that very thing. The very thing of getting cancelled, you don't belong here, get pushed out. It's very real.
Well,
do conservatives think that way? I'm not sure.
No, actually, one thing astonished me. So one of the people I admire most is Claire Lehman, the founder of Quillette, who basically created a organization wherein academics who didn't feel they could publish their work under their own name for fear of their tenure and whatnot could publish through Quillette if it was of appropriate standard to say things that were not politically correct. And this organization has blown up, and Claire is now a hugely influential voice in what's called the intellectual dark web, where people kind of share dangerous ideas, if you like. And she's a woman from Sydney, has a worldwide presence now, tremendous success, all power to what has been a genuine contribution. And yet, just the other day, we won't talk about it too much on this podcast, but she came out in praise of the Cuties film, right? Which has, on the conservative side of politics, and we won't talk about the nature of this film because it's very dubious, but has been universally condemned as this absolutely objectionable horror. She's loved by conservatives, she's loved by libertarians, and the very people that are condemning this film are people that would be her biggest supporters, right? But she's like, no, I'm on the other side of this. And she has the absolute freedom of thought and ability to do that. And she's not going to be ostracized for that. Even though this would be the biggest heresy of moral outrage on the conservative side of politics in recent months, they'll just accept that she's a good faith actor who believes what she believes and wants the best and just thinks that people are overreacting, and that's her opinion, and she'll be met and loved by the same people going forward. Whereas if you're J.K. Rowling, you might have been absolutely obsessed with her work your entire life. She's been a radical lefty, totally anti-Trump, all of that, anti-Brexit, etc., etc. You might be an ardent Remainer, all of that, be devoted to J.K. Rowling. And then because she says something like, we have a word for people who menstruate and it's woman, then they just set everything that they ever had on fire. And then even the actors involved, right? So Emma Watson, Rupert, whatever, who plays Weasley, and Daniel Radcliffe had come out against her. Now they owe everything that they are to J.K. Rowling and her work. 100%. Everything, right?
Yeah.
So irrespective, like even if I disagreed with J.K. Rowling on this, and I don't, but if I did, I would have seen such a betrayal as shameful, right? Like you don't do that to someone to whom you owe everything. It's something that they will all remember, I think. And Robbie Coltrane, I think it was, who plays Hagrid, came out in defense of J.K. Rowling the other day, and people are cancelling Hagrid.
Oh my goodness, yeah, it's just crazy. I think there's like a real, I don't know, maybe it's just evolved so quickly because of social media, but maybe there's just not a distinction between like a quote unquote accountability / absolute extortion and bullying.
Yeah, and one thing I would caution conservatives about is just be generous to the people that don't have that courage. So Douglas Murray, who I have a great admirer of, one of the three sort of gay Brits who are sort of anti-woke, who I really admire, he is deeply critical of anyone who doesn't stand up to this woke mob, right? But he would also recognize intellectually, if not emotionally, the huge cost that a lot of people have. So he's incredibly lucky that he's a world-renowned author, has tons of money and lots of people supporting him. He can say whatever he likes. He's self-employed, right? Whereas I'm in the public sector, and I have to comply with public sector values, right? There are people across the board in major companies. They've all got people from Ivy League universities who have graduated, who are absorbed into this kind of a strange worldview, who now are applying that across major corporations across the world, right? So your probability of having your livelihood destroyed, your career in ruins, the fact that whenever someone Googles you and you apply for another job, it'll come up, and like all of that stuff is such that it creates an environment of fear. Now, it does highlight, as Douglas Murray points to, that one woman who was being shouted at in the street, surrounded by a mob, being told that she had to raise her arm in support of BLM. And she was actually someone who had generally supported that particular movement, but was not willing to go along with this, riot, essentially. The footage of her just at grave personal risk, just refusing flatly to be bullied into doing something that she, by fiat, by people that had no claim to moral authority over her, and calling her all kinds of stuff because she wouldn't do it, is a heroic thing. But you just can't, people have children to feed, people have, and they're not surrounded by people who are of great courage. Like if you've got someone who will just say what they believe no matter what in your life, easier to follow that person, But so these are things to, but as is said, and I agree with this, that you will look back on it with pride to know that you stood up for the right thing, right? It's something that you'll remember. I mean, my grandfather, right up until he passed away, was super proud of my dad and would talk about it to anyone who would listen for being a conscientious objector in the Vietnam War, right? At a time when that wasn't really a thing, right? It was, Australians are very pugnacious, opportunity to go off and fight in a war sounds like a great adventure. And my father was like, look, if they came and invaded Australia, I'd absolutely defend Australia, but I'm not going to kill poor people in their own country. I'm just not going to do that, right? So he wasn't going to inject himself in another country's civil war, okay? And so he, went through a process of the consequences that flowed from that, enormous consequences, but God, there's people proud of him now, and so it's the same principle. Yes, you pay a price, but you pay a much bigger price for not doing anything and not saying anything and not standing up for yourself.
No, I totally agree. I think intrinsically we know what's in our heart is the right thing. We should definitely follow our gut instinct. And also I think people need to remind themselves that it's very easy to say nasty things over the internet, and in how many words is it? 40 characters? I don't know.
It's gone up.
It's gone up now. Yeah, whatever.
Plenty more opportunity for vitriol.
But it's very easy to do that. But would you say it to their face? Would you say that in real life?
Well, you'd think not, and for most people that's the case, but increasingly yes, which is a problem because that's now it's evolved in its own centrifuge. So at first people would look at Twitter and it's an artificial kind of world, right, where everyone's just sort of broadcasting and not listening. Whereas now people are starting to see that as the real world, and people are willing to take things offline that they wouldn't have been able to take offline before. I mean, I think that here in Australia there is less. There's less of this. There's still a lot, but there is less of this, right? Because first of all, Australians are doing a lot better after 30 years of uninterrupted economic growth before the disease. We have a very successful multicultural society. The racial issues, such as they are at the margins relative to the United States, which is front and center always. And we have a good kind of egalitarian ethos of a combination of entrepreneurial spirit, but also social consciousness, which is why I think we've generally handled the disease better because we're good at cooperating, right? And there are voices, and then there's you had the BLM protests as it exploded across the world. Well, it happened in Melbourne, and then we had a massive spike in disease. And although we don't know how or why it happened, a lot of people are putting two and two together. And so there's a degree of antipathy towards this stuff.
I'm just speaking to the point of just the example of say J.K. Rowling and those people. Would they said it to her face that we don't support your opinion and we're gonna and because then she'd be able to actually have a discussion with them, a deep discussion about well, let's look at this. I have basically propelled your entire careers and I didn't mean it this way. You have a meaningful discussion. Whereas if you just have a one-way interaction, then things get muddy and you end up just having a soundboard for yourself, right? And that's how things explode. But
yes, I mean, well, first there was a degree of Schadenfreude when it came to J.K. Rowling because she has been an incipient of the mob, an inciter of this stuff for a while,
Yeah.
right? But for different reasons. And then when it turned on her because of the trans thing, there was that moment of like, well, you're reaping what you sow, right? But then I think people kind of like, no, you are magnanimous when someone wakes up to this, right? And you accept that people genuinely don't see the trauma that's being created until it does turn on them and they know what it's like on the other foot. And when they do make that transition, you accept them with open arms and support them. So J.K. Rowling is in a special place because she is super filthy rich, enormously powerful, and has the resources and the means to stand up to this. What I'm most concerned about are those next great authors that won't even be able to break into the market unless they go through these rituals, and people of the next tier who can be cancelled and attacked and people. And the other thing is, once you've been marked by this mob, right, a lot of people are just not going to think it's worth it to bring that on board themselves. Like if you move from like your current career to a new job, even if the new employer is like, I hate all this work stuff, but I'm inviting a huge amount of pain if I employ this person. Why would I do that to myself?
Yeah, and that's the second thing. So we talked about on during the week.
Yeah.
The public sector life, right? And how they came out with these new guidelines about how do you approach social media as if you work with the public sector. And a big question that flagged my mind was, if I want to engage in the public sector, do I need to scrub my social media? Or if I want to go for a new job, like say I had like really stark, immigration opinions, and then I want to pursue an immigration job or something like that. I mean, right, please.
Well, yes. I mean, so, and look,
it feels like the statue thing all over again a little bit, right?
Yeah, and look, being in the public sector is a different standard objectively, because you do have a responsibility to the government and to the society that you serve. And so, if you've got strong opinions on an area of policy and you then go and work in that policy area, then it is reasonable to take a look at your existing profile and remove things that would call into question your ability to be an impartial public servant, right? So that I think is just common sense. And but it's not like there's no guidelines that make that clear, and arguably if it predated your employment, then it's really up to the agency to have done that due diligence in the first place, because it would have like employed you with this stuff already out there. But no, certainly if you moved into an area of public policy where your opinions conflicted with the agency's views, then it would be prudent to minimize that footprint. Only in those areas, though. And like what I've said today about my own views on social issues, like there are people in my workplace that have completely different opinions to what I've just described, who would be on board with all this intersectional stuff. And I think we would respect one another. The thing that worries me, and I want to stress this point, this is not something I'm observing, but it does worry me, that what happens when you have enormous coercive powers of the state and you want to impose a set of values on the community that you don't have political endorsement for. So, for example, let's say you had the opportunity to fund a particular development project, right? And you were looking at contractors to do the job. Okay, well, do you just evaluate those contractors based on their competency, their price point, their portfolio, their delivery, all of that? Or do you look at, how much diversity do they have on their boards? What have they said about various political things that you care about? Have they made comments on same-sex marriage in the past? Like all of that stuff that is not actually relevant to whether they can complete that particular contract. and make a determination to grant or withhold that support partially on that basis. And now, it's one thing if the minister or your political leader says this will now be a criteria, okay, because they're elected, they're accountable to the public for these decisions, and your job is to carry that out if it's lawful and so on.
Yeah.
Then you do that. You go, yep, it's a criteria. We look at it this way. This is why the government has decided, right?
Yeah.
But if you are just delegated that authority, it's like, okay, well, you've got a certain amount of money that you can spend on your authority. There are procurement rules. You have to go out to tender and evaluate them fairly, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But then you make a determination based on your personal views.
Isn't that what the Equal Opportunity Act is for or something? That is equal opportunity.
Well, it's there are things that you're not supposed to do, right? But like that, a lot of people would what I've just described would seem uncontroversial to them. And now, again, I want to stress, I do not see this. I wouldn't tolerate it if it was happening in my space. If people have a view on certain things, and they might go, well, I'm not willing to give a contract to this group of people because I think they're all misogynistic homophobes, right? Okay. Is the services about delivering services for diverse gay communities? No. Okay. Is it about providing services for women? No. Okay. Oh, it's to build a house. Well, I'm sorry, but we're talking about public money, and we're talking about do they meet the criteria? And have they met the criteria? Do they give us good confidence of a good product, an acceptable price that's in the public interest? Bang, done. And so, the threshold there should be very high. Like, okay, are they currently under investigation for lengthy prosecutions, things like that? Yeah, you look into the probity side of stuff, but you can't go, well, I have strong views on abortion, and I've seen that the CEO of this company has donated to Right to Life foundations or whatever, and therefore I'm going to deny them public funds, government contracts. I mean, that's just outrageous. So, but there is that's the danger.
Yeah.
Okay. And we need to make sure that the public sector does not go down that path. I think that the unelected officials should be very mindful and humble with the tremendous power that they can wield, because you're not personally accountable for a lot of this stuff if you're a public sector official, and yet the decisions you make can dramatically impact individual lives, and most people don't have the capability, the resources, the time, the inclination to challenge the power of the state that might be crushing their rights. It's just, I guess, a general appeal for public sector integrity that, yes, you might have personal views on things, but you need to separate those personal views to delivering an equitable and fair outcome to all people that's in the best interests of the public and the community. And that is why it is important to make that distinction in social media and things like that between your personal and private views, because you don't just want to avoid the actual bias, you want to avoid the perception of bias.
Yes.
That's why you want to kind of democratize these processes as well, bring multiple people, multiple actors into giving their views. So I'm vigilant towards that, and I do try and call out any attempt to push, radical ideologies on the public sector. But again, proud to be in the public service, and I'm very confident that we're a long way from any of these troubles.
Yeah. No, it's really good that they've come out with these guidelines. I don't know. I think it's very applicable just for the general workforce, for any workplace that you represent. Be conscious what you comment on, and but it does make me reflect. I'm thinking I'm thinking about cleaning up my social media periodically, because my opinions change. We evolve, we grow, we learn new things, right? And the problem is with social media and this internet age is that everything stays online, because you get all these celebrities get pulled up their old tweets or whatnot, and then they get criticized for that, but they might not have that view anymore. They might have just not. It's like I said, it's the statue thing. So it's I think there should be some sort of training or like a way of navigating that. But
wholeheartedly agree. No, well, it's unnatural, right? I mean, one of the great innovations of Christianity was to be able to make a distinction between one's previous and future behavior and views, right? Like that's the whole concept of what atoning and forgiveness and all of that is all about, right? There's a recognition that you do change over time, and the person you are today may not be the person that you were, right? And in fact, there's always this sense that you progress through life and you look back on who you were at a previous time and you measure your progress against that yardstick. And that would be advice I'd give to anyone is not compare yourself where everyone else is today, but compare yourself to who you were yesterday and make sure you continue to improve.
Yeah.
And so
because people aren't born perfect, okay? Like when you're born into this world, it's not like all these different ideologies and which one's meant to be for you. But like you said, you changed political views from the left, and then you became, as you grew older, you grew.
Well, actually, the most that I would argue that I haven't changed my political views. Actually, that the political ground has shifted. So okay. I have always cared about equitable delivery of services for the betterment of the large majority of people. So I believe in access to education, universal healthcare, minimum wages, compulsory retirement savings, support for people out of the workforce to have children and various like entitlements of work. All that stuff I think is great. I think it really makes sure that we spread opportunity. We don't create distances between rich and poor so great that the system itself becomes corrupt, that we still have the incentives and rewards for effort, for innovation and entrepreneurial spirit and people taking risks without leaving the rest of the community behind. We don't end up with people in gated communities and no one else having any police like protection, that sort of stuff. Like I'm totally against that, which are left views because they require some degree of redistributive policy. You need to have progressive taxation, and so these are left ideas, right? And I'm totally on board. I would entertain universal basic income, all this sort of stuff, but I'm totally against being ashamed of our past based on a fiction that's being created about it. I'm totally against reintroducing race as a major element of our society. I think that the best philosopher on race in the 20th century was Martin Luther King Jr., who profoundly said that I have a dream that my children will be judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin, which means deracializing our society in such that it doesn't matter what race you are, or how much melanin you have in your skin. What matters is who you are and how you interact and behave towards yourself and society and others. That's how I view the world, right? And the capturing of the left with this obscene, harmful form of neo-Marxism in a kind of fascistic reversal of racial theory is something that I wholeheartedly reject, and that has pushed me to the right because I have more in common with people on the right, despite never abandoning my core policy views. I also believe absolutely in freedom of expression. I think that we need freedom of speech in order to think and communicate and resolve issues, and that all progressive ideas start out as minority viewpoints. Ergo, you can't suppress ideas, otherwise you don't make any progress. Ergo, progressives themselves should be more open to these Enlightenment principles. I also am not a moral relativist. I do think that we can objectively say that Western culture has done more for the well-being of the society than the people in North Korea, right? Like, it's not that the North Koreans have a different experience of the world and different understanding of perspectives and things that are benefit to them. No, because you also have South Korea as a wonderful counterpoint, and they're the same society. So, we have So a superior Western liberal Enlightenment tradition where sovereignty of the individual and freedom of thought and expression, private property rights, all of that, which are conservative principles, are better than those that have alternatively been tried. So yeah, I don't think I've politically changed. What I've seen is that the tail of the left has gone so far in one direction in this authoritarian nightmare that, okay, I was always this distant from the right. Well, they seem a lot closer to me than the people at that end. And that's why people on the far left basically accuse all centrists of being far right. Like my spiel today could have people accusing me of being far right, you know, that I don't accept this kind of intersectional ideology, right? That makes me, you know, the alt-right extremist or whatever. Yeah, but I'm
also thank you for your essay and your TED Talk. But what I was just, my point was just to say that, you know, this didn't come immediately when you were born. Like, it took time and experience, and, you know, you developed these ideologies and you learned, you know, and intrinsically you want to do the right thing, you know. You know, if there is a radical shift in culture, like, who knows where our views will be, and, you know, but we shouldn't be demonized for the views that we had in the past for who we are now. That's what anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, you it's obscene that some people are saying, well, you know, when you were 17, you said this, and therefore at 48 years of age, you can't have this job. Like, I mean, or people apologizing. Like, I've never, ever going to apologize to the general public for something I said 20 years ago plus, right? Or 15 years ago plus. Too bad, right? Like, I mean, if it's in the, like, there is a statute of limitations on my public shaming, okay? I'll put up with, like, you know, months, maybe a year or two, depending on the issue, but not like something that happened at a different stage.
It's like the crazy partner that you have, or like crazy boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, like you have, and it's like, do you remember that time, June 24th, 2005, you said this? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, they'll put that in the pocket and get you for that later. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. It just like explodes. Oh, that's funny. Okay, I think that's all the time we have for. We've gone on a little bit, but it's fine.
Yeah, it's been good. It's been a good discussion.
Yeah, it's been like this. If you have any comments, any questions, please leave them down below. Happy to discuss them and cover them next week. Have you got anything else to say?
No. I'm really thankful for all the Lithuanian audience. I'm really glad with the engagement we're getting on that video as well, and we'll discuss this again in future. Got a lot more content in that area coming along. And yeah, we've got the US presidential election debates happening.
Yes.
So we will be smashing those. We'll be very red-eyed watching those live. And yeah, otherwise, yeah, thanks for continuing to help us grow.
All right. See ya.
See you next time.